So first things first, let's talk about Missouri. Alabama loses this game, and it comes out just before the game that Alabama's changing the starting lineup. If you had listened to any of the press conferences with Nate Oates or any of the CTSN stuff, it sounded like Nate was going to make a change to the starting lineup, and he did. And it was the starting lineup change that me and Hunter Johnson, a bunch of others, really were hoping for. It was Mark Sears, LeBaron Philon, Chris Youngblood, Grant Nelson, and Cliff Amore. It was the lineup we wanted, and it just didn't work. And I don't know if that was a situation of it's not the lineup that works best, because I still feel confident that that is the lineup that makes the most sense for a starting lineup for me. However, it just didn't work. Missouri came out incredibly hot. They blitzed Alabama from the start. Alabama gets down 12-0 and never comes back really in this game. Alabama cuts it to 6 at one point, or in the second half, cuts it to 6 another time late in the second half. But really, Alabama never was in this game from the blitzing that happened at the beginning of this game. A lot of that was due to Missouri making a lot of shots. Missouri played incredibly efficient offensive basketball. They shot a 1.39 offensive points per possession, but Alabama scored a 1.24. And 1.24 in most cases is going to win you a basketball game. And that kind of goes to when you look at the issues that face Alabama basketball, they are not on the offensive end. They're on the defensive end. We've talked a little bit about that. This is similar to last year's team. I think the difference in this year's team and last year's team is, at least on paper, this year's team was substantially better defensively. If you were in the space after the game, we had some discussions around this. I personally do think part of this is, at least in small part, due to some of our injuries, with like a Darian Reed and Latrell Wrightsell. Those are two of your better defenders, especially on the perimeter. And in most cases, stopping the ball is, first and foremost. And when you have an injury to a guy like Latrell Wrightsell that was one of your better defending guards, and then you have Chris Youngblood that, is coming back from his injury. At this point, I think he's closer to 100%, but still it just doesn't seem like the same guy. And then Darian Reed, your longest, most athletic kind of defender, has been injured and hasn't played for substantial portions of this year. I didn't know he wasn't going to play in this game, but it sounds like he may not play for quite a while now. It really just has changed a lot with how Alabama defends and how they want to defend. And it does not seem like Alabama has made the changes they need to make on the defensive end. I think part of it's effort, but I think part of it is just communication. I think part of it is meshing with the talent. I think part of it is certain guys getting lost in the rotation, right? Maybe a guy like Cliff not fitting the scheme quite as well as you hoped he would. It still feels like he's asking a lot of, hey, am I doing the right thing here? It doesn't seem instinctive. So there definitely are some issues on the defensive end, and I think that's really what plagued you in this game. Another thing that I mentioned, and if you've watched any of these previews or if you read any of my threads, I can usually point out, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm a basketball savant. I never have claimed to be one. But I can obviously do some research on these teams and give you an idea of, hey, these are the 2 or 3 guys, on the offensive or defensive end that you have to watch out for because they can take over the game, whether they're an elite shooter, an elite guy that causes a ton of havoc on the defensive end or whatever. And here recently, it feels like Alabama's issues have been just basic scouting report stuff. And that's a concern for me. It's not something that we often will see, but this Alabama team has given up career highs to multiple guys this season. And it feels like the guys who they're giving up career highs to, in most cases, are the elite guy you have to stop, right? Whether it's Eaglestaff at North Dakota, he was the leading bucket getter for North Dakota. You see a guy like Josh Hubbard at Mississippi State. He's the leading bucket getter. Trey Johnson. In this case, Mark Mitchell. He was the second leading bucket getter. But even in this game, you saw a lot of lazy passes that were just picked off by Anthony Robinson. If you did any amount of base level research on this game, you would have known Anthony Robinson is the guy that has caused a ton of issues in the backcourt. If you have a lazy pass around him, he does pick them off. He takes them coast to coast. That is what he does, right? He ends up with 3 steals in this game. And again, this feels like him, Tamar Bates. Like, these guys are the guys you circle. If you ask somebody a question about Mizzou, these are guys you're going to circle. Then you see Alabama just losing a guy like Caleb Grill on the three-point line. He ends up only going 3 of 9 in this game, but a couple of the ones that he made were just wide open threes. The guy shoots 47%. Like, you cannot leave a 47% three-point shooter open. I don't care where he's at, right? You have to stay on him. You have to stay with it. Now, and I'm gonna mention this, and I said this in the postgame. I do not think referees were the reason that Alabama lost this game. I will not say that. I think Alabama just played poor defense and got down so much to start this game that you just were not coming back. However, there were multiple moments in this game where calls were made that, in my opinion, were substantially egregious. The technical foul that was called on Mohamed Diabate that they said was not a play on the ball was just not accurate. His hand comes down, swipes on the ball, he gets his wrist, and then he ends up wrapping up with the second hand, but was clearly a play on the basketball. Was it a foul? Absolutely, but was not a flagrant. They call it a flagrant. You could make an argument that Nate Oates' wasn't a flagrant. I'm okay with that one being called a flagrant. Things went all over the floor. Yes, it was a dead ball, but that one fairly often is going to get called. I'm less concerned about that one. Mark Sears wrapped up. I think it's a little much, but again, I'm okay with that one. I'm okay with the Nate Oates ones. Do I slightly disagree? Sure, but those are not nearly as egregious as the Mohamed Diabate one. The other one, the referees just letting 15 seconds run off the clock, that the announcers even were flabbergasted by. The Mohamed Diabate one, another one that the announcers, one of which was a Mizzou legend, both of those calls were ones that the announcers were just kind of very, very confused by, and that's usually a good barometer of, is a call just pretty odd? Are the announcers kind of unable to hide their what the heck is this? And in both of those cases, those 2 calls were ones that were very strange. There were some other just lack of calls where it felt like, if it was me, I'm very shocked that Nate Oates did not get ejected from this game, if you want me to be completely honest. And it wasn't the calls that were being made outside of that Mo Diabate one. For me, it was the lack of calls. There were some rebounding calls and such that it just did not feel like were being called, right? Or a moving screen. Like one of the Caleb Grill threes, he had a guy just fully, offensive line blocking for him, setting the screen, and not letting anybody get around, like shuffling his feet and everything. So there is some level to that. And I bring this up for multiple reasons. One, obviously, the officials happen. It's basketball. There's not a ton you can do about it. But the second reason I bring this up is something that Alabama has to do a better job of. And it's something that I think Alabama has done a very poor job of this season, is adjusting to how the officials are calling the game. And what I mean by that is Alabama goes into every game, assuming that you could go up soft with the ball on the layup and that you're just going to get the call if you get hit. In some cases, that's true. In some cases, that's not. Or they're not being really fighting through screens because they're assuming, I don't need to fight through. As soon as I get held up, I'm going to get a call. They're going to call the defender. Again, in some cases, that's true. In some cases, that's not, right? And the thing is, Alabama has not done a great job adjusting to that. Similarly, whether we're inbounding the ball, it feels like Alabama is more concerned with having the referee call a delay of game penalty on the opposition, for hitting the ball or whatever, getting away from us before the inbound, which Kentucky did in that first game. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we break down the Kentucky game here in a bit. But, this is something that I would expect Nate and them were making comments about it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the call's not being made. You just have to move on with however the game is being called, right? So I would agree that there are some calls that I wish were made differently. In my opinion, they should have been made differently. However, the game is being called how the game is being called. And Alabama has to do a better job of playing how the game is being called. right? It feels like they're going soft to the basket, hoping to get the foul call, and then when they're not getting it, they're sulking that they didn't get the foul call, and that's hurting them on defense on the other end, and they're giving up an easy basket, and then you're down more and more and more, right? We've seen this time and time and time again, and it's from all levels of the team, right? You see it from, veterans and freshmen alike, right? So that's something that really definitely bothers me, that I've noticed about Alabama this year. I've seen it in some previous seasons, but it's definitely been very, very common this year. Like I said, the other thing that was been huge for me is the losing the other team's best player. It just, I don't understand it. It's something that, like I said, if you can do a basic scouting report, I'm sure Nate and Pannone and Co go very deep into the scouting reports. At a certain point, it feels like you have to conquer the basics. And for me, the basics are, hey, Grill is a 47% three-point shooter. I don't care what happens. He cannot have an open shot, right? He just can't. And so, that's one that just feels like you're missing the easy stuff because you're more worried about the difficult stuff. In this game, I guess you could call the high point being Mark Sears after his poor game that he had against Auburn. He has 35 points on his birthday. So, we can call that a positive note. But in all actuality, there was not a ton of super positives you can draw from this game. Alabama obviously put up a ton of points, but the defense in general was just so poor. And the thing that really bothered me and bothered most of us when we were talking about this game was you had 14 turnovers, and 11 of those 14 turnovers were from your three primary ball handlers, being Mark, Aiden, and LeBaron. All three guys scored in double figures. All three guys technically had pretty good shooting days. Mark had the worst shooting day from three, and he was 5 of 11. And was 7 of 9 from three. Aiden Holloway's from two. Aiden Holloway's 1 of 2. Everybody shot the ball very well. It just was not a game that you liked how the ball handlers were taking care of the basketball. And against a Missouri team that just prides themselves on steals, Missouri gets 12 steals. And we have 14 turnovers and 12 steals. That's a problem, right? Missouri was able to run in transition a lot. We were losing shooters a lot. And that happens when transition happens. And it just feels like Missouri was able to play their basketball game. And some of the points that I thought Alabama would be able to take advantage of, they just weren't. Alabama should have been able to take advantage of the glass. Alabama got out defensive rebounded. We technically had slightly more offensive rebounds than they did, but we had 11-9. And that's just not enough against a pretty poor defensive rebounding team in Missouri. Obviously, they did not shoot the ball or they shot the ball so well that there weren't a ton of rebounds to be had, but still in general, you need that to be better. Another thing that really bothers me is Alabama didn't really seem to make any adjustments when it came to a guy like Mark Mitchell. Mark Mitchell had his day down low. Mizzou ends up shooting 74% from inside the arc. And a lot of that was Mark Mitchell. Mark goes 10 of 12. And, Alabama tried to throw Cliff at him. We tried to throw Aiden at him. We tried one of the craziest lineups of all time that had Cliff, Aiden, and Mo Diabate on the floor all at one time. Not sure what that was, but we tried all sorts of different things. And just the lack of communication was absolutely awful. I don't know what we were doing in certain moments. We gave up a dunk with 3 forwards on the floor. We had both Aiden, Cliff, and Mo all on the floor at one time, and we let a guard dunk on us. Wide open lane with 2 guys looking at him, right? There was just multiple moments in this game where Alabama just did not have the discipline on offense or on defense that you need if you're going to play at an elite level. Credit to Missouri. They shot the lights off the ball. There is in theory, you could, if Missouri shoots more poorly in this game, you're looking at this game differently if you're Alabama, because you're like, oh, if Missouri doesn't shoot 75% from two, this is a 4-point game, or, Alabama, potentially even wins this game. And we think completely differently about, how Alabama played in this game. However, in my mind, the fact of the matter is Alabama played awfully on defense. And we needed a game like this to wake us up. Because at moments in this game, or in this season, Alabama has not played well on defense. And this is the quintessential way to prove it. Like, Alabama has to be stronger with the basketball on offense. Alabama has to play smarter on defense. This is a better defensive team than it was last season. But if we do not take the step forward like we did last season moving into March Madness, this team is going to lose some games that they should not. And that potentially could cause you, a loss in the SEC tournament or a loss in the NCAA tournament, in which you don't want to have. So that's something that I would look at in this game. All credit to Missouri. They played a great game. They shot the absolute cover off the basketball. But I'm really disappointed with how Alabama played. And I tweeted this out, that I don't go with they can't miss. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, Missouri can't miss. Some of the guys that we were saying can't miss were 40% shooters that were left wide open. Of course he's not going to miss. Right? Like, if an opposing team leaves Aiden Holloway open, are we expecting him to miss? No. If you leave Mark Sears open, you're not expecting him to miss, right? A 40% shooter is generally not going to miss if he's wide open. I'm not saying never, but in most cases he's not. And that's what was happening against Mizzou, is they had good shooters taking good shots, and they were going in, and people were confused. It's like, yeah, the guy's a great shooter. I'm not sure what you were expecting. So I think that's the one that really gets me. Alabama just has to be more locked into the scouting report, quite frankly. They have to be more prepared for what a team is going to throw at them. I do think that the starting lineup was the one that I want to see. It wouldn't shock me if we see some more changes with that. I would like to see Aiden Sherrill potentially play a little more. I really was disheartened by how few of rebounds Grant and Cliff got. They played 33 minutes and they got 4 rebounds. Or 5 rebounds. That's a problem for me. I know there were a lot of shots that were made in this game, but you still got to get rebounds. So for me, that's what I would look at. I would look at, potentially making some changes. I don't know exactly what all those look like, but I would like to see some potential lineup, adjustments made. Obviously, Mohamed Diabate, just has to play. He's the only guy with more than 4 rebounds in this game for Alabama. And he has 10. He has a double-double. So, I mean, if there's a bright spot in this game, it's Mo D with his double-double. But, for me, it's just a situation of just poor defense from Alabama's part and elite shooting from Missouri's. So that's what I have to say about the game. Like I said, I know this was, pretty negative, but Alabama just did not play to their potential. And if you do not play better, Kentucky will blow you out in the next game. So let's move on to that Kentucky game.